In Faceting Slab Glass video number 1, I demonstrated how to facet a block of glass 3 1/4 inches by 1 1/4 inches. I will now show how to facet a long, narrow piece which requires a somewhat different approach. I will facet a piece of glass 12 inches long and 5/8 of an inch wide at one end, tapering to a point at the other end. As I noted in Faceting Slab Glass number 1, eye protection is mandatory throughout the entire process. Since I will be using a full length of a dowel, it is possible to start with an intact dowel, which is a more economical approach since it will consume less glass. But for this demonstration, I will use a strip of glass 12 inches by 3 1/4 inches since it will be easier to manipulate than a full dowel. It is possible to start with a narrower strip, but as the glass gets narrower, the likelihood of an accidental fracture increases. The first step is to trace the upper edge of the pattern onto the edge of the glass. In this example, the top edge of the pattern is an outside curve, so I will remove the excess glass using a 10-inch water-cooled tile saw, employing a series of tangential cuts shown traced on the glass. In this situation, I have found it to be easier and faster to use the tile saw rather than the ring saw. The glass is now ready for the initial faceting. As in the previous video on faceting, I will start with a 1/2 inch carbide tipped chisel and facet the entire upper edge of the glass down to the thickness required for the design. If I want a thin edge, I may change to a 3/8 inch chisel or even a 1/4 inch chisel for more control over how much glass is removed. After the initial faceting is completed, the lower half of the pattern is traced onto the glass. The faceted piece of glass is now cut away from the glass strip using the 10-inch water-cooled ring saw, which is more appropriate for this task than the tile saw, since the lower edge of the pattern is an inside curve. It is important to start the cut at the narrowest part of the piece since it is the most fragile. If the saw cut is initiated at the widest end, the glass has a tendency to fracture when the saw blade reaches the narrow portion, since it is now only attached to the underlying glass by a very thin and fragile bridge. The glass chips being removed by the faceting are the thickest at the point where the chisel strikes the glass, and then become thinner as they get further away from the point of impact. This often results in the lower edge of the piece being somewhat thicker than the upper edge in some places. This difference can be corrected with careful, gentle faceting with a 1/4 inch chisel. I have used a weight to backstop the glass while I remove the unwanted material. Care is required since this is the point in the process where unexpected fracture most commonly occurs. The final shaping is performed on a standard tabletop grinder, which also leaves a nice, flat, 90-degree edge, which facilitates foiling. The finished piece shown with the initial pattern is now ready for foiling.